A warm welcome to all of you, dear participants. I'm Friederike Seidel, your event coordinator and leader of the 9th of May initiative. If you wish to follow today's event in French, please click on the globe at the bottom. It is a great honor to bring you all together here on behalf of the World Council of Churches around a vision which has been on my heart for several decades. We convene today around one of the most urgent measures to tackle the climate emergency and its impact on children. Using our power as bank clients, climate experts and faith-based actors will share why this measure gives a lot of concrete hope to children. A huge thanks to Iyad and Asmaira from UNEP, Kirsten and Jody from JLI, and Joseph from the Laudato Si Movement for this collaboration. It is my great pleasure to introduce Jessica Bwali from the United Church of Zambia, co-moderator of our event.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you that are joining us. And it is actually my pleasure to introduce Bishop Bedford-Strohm, who is the leader of the WCC governing bodies, who shares his greeting in a recording.
Dear friends, my grandson Amos is now 4 years old. I love him deeply. It will be in the year 2081 that he will be as old as I am now. Like any other grandfather on this earth, I want my grandson and all other children to have a life at least as good as mine. We begin to understand more and more that we will need radical change in our economic and ecological behavior to make that possible. That is why, as moderator of the WCC, I welcome this conference about children's future in light of the climate emergency so much. It highlights a very powerful measure which could accelerate climate solutions really fast. And that measure is money, is investment of money. Where and how we choose to bank has a huge impact on CO2 emissions. My own churches in Germany have to invest a lot of money for their pension funds. We have chosen to disinvest from companies which are part of the problem of continually increasing CO2 emissions rather than part of the solution. Let us all do whatever we can at our specific place to make money into a driving force of fundamental ecological transformation. In this spirit, I warmly welcome you all to this webinar, which the World Council of Churches Child Rights Program is co-organizing with UNEP Faith for Earth, the Joint Learning Initiatives on Faith and Local Communities, and the Laudato Si Movement. Many thanks to all the organizers and God's blessings for your presentations and discussions, which will help all of us to move towards a better future.
As Bishop has actually said, we are all welcome to today's webinar. And with that being said, it's my delight to introduce Professor Dr. Patricia Mbote, who is the Director of the Law Division of the United Nations Environment Program. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you very much. Dear friends and colleagues, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to this very special event as we celebrate the first anniversary of the launch of this joint appeal for climate responsible finance as a moral imperative towards children. Exactly 1 year ago, we gathered together to launch a groundbreaking initiative that brought together leaders from different faiths and backgrounds, united in our commitment to address the climate crisis and its impact on children. I am honored to be here on behalf of UNEP and its Faith for Earth Coalition. We have partnered with the World Council of Churches, the Council of Muslim Elders, and the New York Council of Rabbis. Today, we are also joined by the Laudato Si Movement and the Joint Learning Initiative to take the discussions to the next level. This appeal recognizes that the climate crisis is not just an environmental issue, but a moral issue that affects the most vulnerable members of our global community, our children. It called for urgent action to be taken by the financial sector to prioritize climate responsible investments and divest from fossil fuels. Since the launch of this appeal, we have seen incredible progress made towards the goal of climate responsible finance. Faith leaders, investors, and financial institutions have come together to create new initiatives, programs, and policies that prioritize sustainable and responsible investment practices. As we celebrate the first anniversary of this important initiative, we recognize that there is still much work to be done. The climate crisis continues to threaten the health and well-being of children around the world, and we must remain committed to taking bold and decisive action. Today, we have the opportunity to hear from some of the leaders who have been instrumental in driving this initiative forward. We will hear about the progress that has been made over the past year, the challenges that remain, and the actions that we can all take to continue making a difference. I am grateful to each and every one of you for joining us today to celebrate this important milestone. Together, we can continue to work towards a future where our children, grandchildren can thrive in a sustainable and just world. The partners have identified 4 key areas of focus for the Moral Imperative Initiative. These are climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution, and unsustainable consumption and production. These areas are interconnected and require urgent action if we are to mitigate the worst impacts of the environmental crisis. As faith actors, we have a moral responsibility to ensure that our actions align with our values and beliefs. This extends to the financial sector as well. We must ensure that our financial practices are sustainable, not just at the institutional organizational level, but also at the individual level. The finance and banking sectors have a significant impact on the environment and on vulnerable communities. Predatory lending, unethical investments, and other harmful practices can cause irreparable damage to the planet and to those who are most vulnerable. This is where faith actors come in. We can use our position of moral authority to advocate for sustainable financial practices that protect the planet and vulnerable communities. We can work with financial institutions to promote investments in environmentally friendly initiatives and advocate for ethical lending practices that do not take advantage of vulnerable communities. We can also encourage faith adherents to make responsible financial decisions that prioritize sustainability and protect the well-being of children and vulnerable communities. As faith actors, we have a unique responsibility to protect children and vulnerable communities. By advocating for sustainable financial practices, we can ensure that our financial decisions do not harm these communities. We can work together to create a more sustainable future where financial decisions are made with the well-being of all people and the planet in mind. As we gather here today, I urge you to join me in supporting the Moral Imperative Initiative. Together, we can create a sustainable and just world for all people and all living things. Let us act with urgency and conviction, and let us do so in the spirit of unity and cooperation that this initiative represents. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mbote, and thank you so much for that message. So right now, I'll be able to invite you to just share with us on this question. There's just one question that I have for all of us participants right now. How familiar are you with the role of the bank clients in responding to climate emergency? So the question I have is, how familiar are you with the role of the bank clients in responding to the climate emergency? So in the chat box, there's a link that has actually been put for you. So please click on the link in the chat box. Then you just share with us your response. So how familiar are you with the role of the bank clients in responding to the climate emergency? And remember, there's never any wrong answer in this world. So whatever that where you are right now, just be as honest as you can. You can just let us know, how familiar you are, so that at least as we go on in our conversations, we can get to see if we'll be able to just pick up some new information, or our familiarity from the start will be able to change, and so on. So please just go in the chat box, click on that link, and share your view. How familiar are you with the role of bank clients in responding to the climate emergency? Just rate your knowledge and experience just by clicking on those different options that have been given. And also just a reminder, this conversation, we are trying to see how best we can actually save the lives of our children by way of, responsible banking. So I'm sure by the time that we'll be able to get done, we would have at least shared all that information coming from our speakers, and also from you, our participants, wherever you're joining us from, any part of the world. And also, just remember, if you have a question, put in the Q&A section. And for the question that we've just asked now, there's a link in the chat box. Click on the link and answer, how familiar are you with the role of bank clients in responding to climate emergency? Okay, I think we'll be able to move to our next section. Thank you so much for all those that have actually responded. Really, really appreciate. And so we'll actually be able to share the outcomes of our question. Yes. Which is really, really good. Actually, like I mentioned, there's no wrong answer. So we can see the varieties, actually, how all the answers are actually varying. In blue, we have 39, which is limited knowledge. 20, we actually have in pink, we have good knowledge at 20%. At 16%, we have no action taken, which is in red, and we have taken action, which is in 25. So you can see how all the answers are actually varying, and that actually shows a great variety of backgrounds in this event today. So by sharing your experiences, we'll be actually stronger to ensure a bright future for our children. Okay, we'll be able to move into our next section. And in this first session, we'll actually hear what is at stake for children, and also get to learn more about carbon bombs. I have Paloma, who will be able to actually come through right now. And Paloma, you are actually the senior advisor for UNICEF on climate advocacy. Can you just tell us about the impact of climate emergency on children? And
thank you all, and thank you to the organizers for putting the spotlight on the impact of the climate crisis in more than 1 billion children all around the world. I imagine that all of us here attending today, we know that the climate crisis is a child rights crisis, that this is not inevitable, that it is in our hands to act to protect every vulnerable child in the worst affected countries by climate change. So I don't know, but perhaps you have already read the UNICEF Children's Climate Risk Index, where clearly is stated that 1 billion children are at extremely high risk of the impact of climate change. The worst impacted places to live at the moment as a child are places like the Central African Republic, Chad, Nigeria. 24 out of the 33 most impacted countries by the climate crisis are in sub-Saharan Africa. This climate crisis is putting at risk their health of every child, their education, their basic protection. They are exposing every child to deadly diseases. We also know that these climate and environmental shocks are affecting every single child's rights, from their access to clean air, their access to food and safe water, to their right to education, to safe housing, to freedom from exploitation, and also is threatening their very basic right to survive. Some overwhelming data that are really the ones who have to frame this conversation, because the enormity of the exposure to risk of children require an enormous, immediate, urgent response. We know that 240 million children are highly exposed to coastal flooding. We know that 330 million children are highly exposed to river flooding, that 400 million children are highly exposed to cyclones. 600 million children are highly exposed to vector-borne diseases. 815 million children are highly exposed to lead pollution. 820 million children are highly exposed to heat waves. 920 million children are highly exposed to water scarcity. 1 billion children are highly exposed to exceedingly high levels of air pollution. Compared to adults, children require more food and water per unit of their body weight. Compared to adults, children are less able to survive extreme weather events, and they are more susceptible to toxic chemicals, temperature changes, and diseases. They require specific protection and a specific investment to make sure that they can survive the climate crisis, the climate shocks, but especially they can thrive, and not only today, but also we need to protect the right to survive and thrive of the future generations. This is an equity crisis. The ones who are the least responsible for the climate crisis are the ones suffering the most. 33 of the countries who are at extremely high risk collectively emit only 9% of the global CO2 emissions, while 10 of the highest emitters collectively account for nearly 70% of the global emissions. No child is responsible for the rising global temperatures, but they are paying the highest cost. And children from the least responsible countries will suffer the most. So what can we do today? Especially what can we do, everyone who have committed to attend this meeting and to take action about it. First, and as it has been so well said by the previous speakers, we need to invest in what is right, in what is fair. Especially we need to invest in the adaptation of essential services for children. We need to be investing at community level in healthcare, in water safety, in education. And we need to make sure that in the roadmap, in the conversations that are taking place at the moment to increase the funding for adaptation, the funding for loss and damage, communities and children are put in first. Of course, all of us, we need to keep reducing emissions by at least 45% by 2030. And we need to be providing children and young people with education and the green skills they require to be living in a world that has already changed by climate. But if I can say, let me just end up with how we need to be putting children and young people at the forefront. It was Fridays for Future and the youth-led climate strikes now, 5 years ago, when they really rang the bell. And they have been the ones who have been really keeping the torch of the action around climate, even during COVID, even during the horrific impact of the never-ending wars all around us. They have a right not only to be part of the discussions of the delegations, they have the right to be part of any negotiations going on and any decision making, and hopefully also they have the right to be at the essence of all our discussions about their present and about their future. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paloma, and also for the wonderful collaboration through the partnership between UNICEF and the World Council of Churches. We had planned to have now a presentation by Kjell Kühne, who is the author of the mapping on carbon bombs. I'm going to put in the chat box a really important article he wrote. We are not able to see him right now. I don't think he's with us. Can you just reconfirm, Walter? Or Kjell, if you're with us, just let me know. But we have a plan B. In fact, there was also an amazing team of experts who wrote a report that is published every year. It's called the Banking on Climate Chaos Report. And Shawna Foster is one of the representatives from that really important report, and she has sent a video which Walter is going to share with us now.
Hi there, my name is Shawna Foster, and I'm from the Rainforest Action Network. Every year we publish the Banking on Climate Chaos Report, which you can access at bankingonclimatechaos.org, which details how much banks invest in the fossil fuel industry. Since 2016, the top banks have invested $5.5 trillion into the fossil fuel industry. We use this as a benchmark because that's the year that the Paris Agreement was supposed to be enacted and the world was supposed to turn to help keep us at 1.5 C degrees of post-industrial warming. However, banks have not been admitting their role into playing this. It wasn't until the Glasgow Council of Parties that they realized that they needed to get together and form the Net Zero Alliance. However, we have been exposing how much banks have been financing fossil fuels for 14 years. Last year, in 2022, banks financed fossil fuels for $669 billion. That's in United States dollars. Those trillions and billions of dollars should be going towards a just transition, but banks are intervening to keep the fossil fuel industry alive. The fossil fuel market is very volatile, and if market forces were allowed to work its way on this sector the way it does on other forms of industry, then the fossil fuel industry would have had to reform long ago. Take methane gas, for example. Using opportunism from the Ukraine crisis, lots of fossil fuel industries were saying, oh my gosh, methane gas is so expensive, we have to build way more, and it hit historic highs. However, this summer it hit historic lows as we are preparing for an overbuild. And so when the market is low and these fossil fuel industries don't have the capital, they can borrow it from banks, when banks really should say that these fossil fuel companies need to have a more sustainable way instead of depending on boom and bust cycles to do business. So that's one way that banks help out fossil fuels when they really don't have to, is throwing them a life preserver of debt to get through the bust times. Another way that banks intervene is that they act as financial advisors on loser fossil fuel projects. Here in the United States, we're facing an overbuild of over 25 methane gas export facilities in the Gulf. And it's a gold rush right now for these downstream energy companies to build these export facilities and to secure financing. And each one of these projects has a big bank like Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan Chase acting as a financial advisor to convince other banks to invest in these loser projects. And if they don't reach the financial status, then they don't invest their money and build it out. So banks acting as a financial advisor for fossil fuel projects when they really shouldn't. Banks have a very active role not only in lending, but also in underwriting. One way that banks get around fossil fuel financing is through policy loopholes. Most of their policies focus on lending. They say, oh, well, we don't lend to anything that destroys the Arctic or the Amazon. But then it turns out they only don't lend to specific fossil fuel projects that happen in the Arctic and Amazon, but they're very happy to lend to the companies behind those projects, which means that 96% of all fossil fuel financing happens without any climate policy applied to it whatsoever. And things like banks continuing to finance ConocoPhillips who is building the massive Willow project in Alaska, goes by their climate policies just fine because they have pledged to not finance projects. So banks really do shape the way we look at the environment and the fossil fuel companies' ability to keep going on without transforming. And it's high time that we hold them accountable to transforming the world so that we can all live in it.
Thank you so much, Shawna, for that. And with that information, actually getting that information and also the information that came through when Paloma was actually talking to us, I'm sure it can be a whole lot scary and really daunting on us. But actually, the good part is that I think there is actually some hope only if, as bank clients, we actually take certain responsibilities in the way we actually bank. So with that being said, I'll actually be able to invite Vanessa to speak to us. And Vanessa, you being the executive director of BankFWD, would you just share with us some of the key revelations from research into the climate responsible finance and also your advice to participants who actually would want to take action with their bank but do not know where to start from?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, Jessica, and to everybody who's taking the time to tune in for this important session. It's a really exciting moment as we enter a new realm and chapter of fighting climate change. What we're starting to recognize is that this is that our money gives us the power to fight climate change in more ways than many of us ever realized. Our research through my organization, BankFWD, and that of many allies like the Rainforest Action Network that you just heard from, has shown us at how to calculate how many emissions each of our dollars funds. And it allows us to compare what each dollar funds in different banks, which gives us the power to make decisions that are better for the environment and optimize our use of money. Our research shows that 24 out of every $100, that's 24% of the dollars that banks lend out goes to fossil fuels. Now ask yourself, where do banks get the money to lend out? They get it from the money that we deposit with them. When we put our money in banks, we give them cash that we believe just sits there until we need it. But banks can use that cash as collateral, which means as a backup for loans they can make to fossil fuel companies, like my colleague at the Rainforest Action Network just talked about. They can use it to invest in fossil fuels. They can use it in a number of ways. And with that, they can then support fossil fuel projects that you, as their clients, might not have known your money was supporting. So up to 24% of all of the dollars that you entrust to banks in Wall Street, that's in the US, touch fossil fuels. That number is different all around the world. In the United Kingdom, it can be lower, but still quite close to the Wall Street numbers. Around the world, those numbers range a great amount. And in the chat, I have inserted a link to a calculator that you can use to directly calculate how many emissions your money funds if you use a Wall Street bank. We hope to have a version 2 of this calculator very soon that will include banks from all around the world. We just have to gather all of the data, as many banks are not yet reporting. So when you figure this out, you start to learn things that $3,000 in a bank on Wall Street funds the same number of emissions as a flight you could take from New York to Los Angeles. That's a cross-country flight funded by essentially your money in a bank on Wall Street and the equivalent emissions. You can then start to make more educated decisions. And we've also included in the chat a link with questions that you can ask your bank, or you can give a teacher to ask their school to ask a bank, or that you can bring into a company and ask the company to potentially ask the bank. It begins with a conversation, because that shows banks that we as their clients care about what it is that they do with the money we entrust to them. When we ask a bank to look out for our money, which is what we rely on to look out for our families, we entrust that banks will use our money to look out for our families as well. If you don't like the answers, there are a number of things you can do, but if you consider switching banks, there are resources like Switch It Green in the UK. It launches tomorrow, so keep an eye on that space. It is a tool to change between banks in the UK. It's easier to do this in the UK than in the US and in other parts of the world. So this is a template and a model we will try to spread to each new area. There's also a note that a journalist wrote for people to use to help people break up with their banks, as if you were breaking up with a girlfriend or a boyfriend. It doesn't help to leave a bank if you don't tell them why it is you're leaving. We want banks to know what their clients want, and we want our banks to succeed. We want to create a race to the top so that every bank is competing to be better and better. The point with BankFWD and with all of us here is not to leave banks that aren't doing the right thing. We want all banks to do the right thing, and we all have the power with our pocketbooks to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. And thank you so much for just speaking to each one of us with that information. Really, really appreciate. So with that being said, there's a link that will actually be put in the chat box just now. And this is a link actually for a Mentimeter survey. So you can click on the link and tell us in one word, just in one word, how do you feel about engaging with your bank to protect children? So in one word, how do you feel about engaging with your bank to protect children? So you can actually there's a whole lot of words there that you can just pick out, especially with the information that you've gotten now since we actually started the webinar. How? In just one word, how do you feel? Where are you at? How is your heart telling you, or what is your head telling you? Just one word. Thank you so much. Seeing all those responses coming through, really appreciate. So you can just pick a lot of words. Are you feeling interested? Are you feeling anxious? Are you feeling intimidated? Are you feeling motivated? Are you being doubtful? Are you feeling green? Which is actually, I love that word. Are you feeling eager? Are you feeling committed? So thank you so much, Ruth Darlington. I'm seeing you're intrigued. Stefan, you're feeling empowered. Remember, you can actually just drop in the chat box and let us know. Beth, you're feeling motivated, which is really good. Nick, you're feeling motivated as well. So in one word, how do you feel about engaging with your bank to protect children? Because remember, we are looking at tomorrow, the other day, the following week, the following month, the children, where are they going to be? So where are you right now? How are you feeling? Renate is feeling anxious. Thank you so much. So thank you all those responses. So grateful, so grateful. So let me just get in maybe 2 more seconds. Let me see what you are feeling. Elizabeth, you're feeling empowered. Thank you so much. Mwawi is feeling hopeful. Really appreciate for that, for the responses. So let us know, especially with what has actually been shared so far. What is your heart telling you? What is your head telling you with how you feel actually engaging with your bank to protect children? Okay, so thank you so much. And the good part is, like we have seen, there's a whole lot of variety in terms of how all of you are feeling. It's different from one person, and also could be depending on where you are at and what you've heard, and with the new information or the information that you already have heard, and you are feeling what you actually have shared with us. So as we have seen actually the variety of feelings and reaction among you in light of what was shared so far, And there's actually so much hope that comes from this blind spot and this powerful lever of banking choices, which is actually still untapped by many. And this is why actually the WCC Child's Rights Program and the United Nations Environment Program developed an appeal, which was launched exactly a year ago, today on the 9th last year, so exactly a year ago, and it was co-signed by leaders of the WCC, UNEP, the Muslim Council of Elders, and the NY Board of Rabbis. And His Excellency, Judge Mohamed Abdelsalam, who is General Secretary of the Muslim Council of Elders, is one of the co-signatories, and he agreed to share a testimonial with us today about the appeal. So as we listen to Judge, as he'll be speaking in the video, and also some of the other testimonials that will be coming through after him, I'll have two questions for you. So as you speak, as you listen, as you reflect on what will come through, the first question I have for you is, what actions will you undertake as a result of this webinar? Okay, what actions will you undertake as a result of this webinar? And the second question I have is, what support do you need to make these actions sustainable? Okay, when you actually think about those actions you want to undertake, what support do you need to actually make to realize them, to make the actions sustainable? So we'll actually be able, so those two questions, once again, what actions will you undertake as a result of this webinar? And also, what support do you need to undertake these actions and to make them sustainable? So if you wish, you have actually the possibility to share your reflections later. But for now, we'll go to Judge.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحضور الكريم، السيدات والسادة، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. من دواعي سروري أن أشارككم اليوم هذه الفعالية المهمة التي يفخر مجلس حكماء المسلمين أن يكون شريكا فاعلا فيها منذ توقيع النداء المهم والبارز: التمويل المسؤول تجاه المناخ، واجب أخلاقي تجاه الأطفال، الذي تم إطلاقه في مثل هذا اليوم 9 مايو 2022 ليؤكد التزامنا المشترك مع الشركاء والتعاون مع المؤسسات المالية التي من خلالها نقوم بالتمويل والدعم والدعوة إلى الاستثمار والسعي للحصول على تغطية تأمينية مناسبة لنضمن أن تعاملاتنا تتماشى مع هدف اتفاق باريس للحد من ظاهرة الاحتباس الحراري، وهو واجب أخلاقي واجتماعي على الجميع. إن هذا النداء يمثل ضرورة ملحة وهامة وعاجلة تجاه الأجيال الحالية والمستقبلية من خلال التشجيع على الابتعاد عن الاستثمار في الوقود الأحفوري، بما في ذلك الإنتاج والبنية التحتية والاستكشاف، وتحويل التمويل إلى مصادر الطاقة المتجددة للإسهام في القضاء على التأثيرات السلبية المباشرة وغير المباشرة على الأطفال الذين هم أكثر عرضة لهذه التأثيرات من غيرهم. السيدات والسادة، إن مجلس حكماء المسلمين برئاسة الإمام الأكبر أحمد الطيب شيخ الأزهر الشريف يبذل جهودا عديدة من أجل إيجاد حلول ناجعة لقضية التغيرات المناخية، ودعوة الجهات الفاعلة ودعمها لاتخاذ الخطوات المناسبة للاتجاه نحو الطاقة المتجددة. وقد طالبت وثيقة الأخوة الإنسانية التاريخية التي وقعها الإمام الأكبر أحمد الطيب مع أخيه البابا فرانسيس بابا الكنيسة الكاثوليكية في أبو ظبي في 4 فبراير 2019، طالبت قادة العالم وصناع السياسات الدولية والاقتصاد العالمي بالعمل جديا والتدخل فورا لمواجهة ظاهرة تراجع المناخ، والعمل على إيجاد حلول فاعلة لها لحماية هذا الكوكب. كما عكس الحوار التاريخي الذي عقده مجلس حكماء المسلمين في ملتقى الحوار بين الشرق والغرب في مملكة البحرين مع كبار رجال الكنيسة الكاثوليكية وكبار رجال الأديان بمشاركة الإمام الأكبر أحمد الطيب شيخ الأزهر الشريف والبابا فرانسيس بابا الكنيسة الكاثوليكية في نوفمبر الماضي، عكس شعورا مشتركا بين رموز الأديان المختلفة في تحمل المسؤولية الأخلاقية تجاه التحديات المشتركة التي تواجه عائلتنا الإنسانية الواحدة، وفي مقدمتها أزمة التغير المناخي وما أحدثته من تأثيرات سلبية بالتأكيد أسفرت عن أزمات صحية وغذائية وبيئية يعاني منها ملايين البشر من حول العالم. السيدات والسادة المشاركون في هذا الحدث اليوم، إنكم بما تمثلونه من تنوع كبير، سواء قادة دينيين أو علماء أو خبراء أو نشطاء في حقوق الأطفال، يجب علينا جميعا أن نلتزم بالعمل والدفع لتفعيل التطبيق العملي لتوصيات نداء 9 مايو 2022 ودعم جهود تسريع التحول المنقذ للحياة والاعتماد على مصادر الطاقة المتجددة. فهذا هو أحد أهم الإجراءات الأكثر إلحاحا اليوم لحماية الأطفال والكوكب والأجيال القادمة. ونؤكد لكم أننا في مجلس حكماء المسلمين معكم نقدم لكم العون والدعم من أجل مستقبل أفضل لأطفالنا ولإنسانيتنا. شكرا جزيلا والسلام عليكم.
So thanks to one of our next speakers later in the program, Ellyanne Wanjiku, we have entire schools joining the event today from Kenya, and some of the students may not have been able to read all the subtitles as they may have been far away from the screen. So His Excellency Judge Abdelsalam shared that the Muslim Council of Elders is proud to be an active partner and co-signatory of the prominent 9th of May appeal. He describes the push to avoid investments into fossil fuels and the acceleration of a shift to renewable energies as one of the most important steps to safeguarding children. Judge Abdelsalam also urges everyone to recognize this as a moral and social obligation. Dahlia Rockowitz, you are the director of Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action. You were part of the 2022 launch event. Can you please tell us what has been your biggest success and what progress do you see amongst Jewish faith leaders?
Great. Thank you. And I wanted to wish everyone a good morning from Washington, D.C., where I'm based. As you heard, I'm with Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action. And at Dayenu, we're building a multi-generational Jewish movement to confront the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold political action. And one of those areas is finance. So I wanted to share, just to start out, recognizing that this webinar is focused on children. So let me see, here we go. I wanted to share an animating tenet in the Jewish faith. And this is this idea of Ledor Vador, or from generation to generation. So in other words, Ledor Vador, for the Jewish people to survive and thrive from generation to generation, and why we see the imperative to pursue climate justice and to take action on the climate crisis as something that we need to be doing for ourselves and for generations to come. And at Dayenu, we saw that faith institutions, including Jewish institutions, were awakening to the climate crisis. We can see that with the incredible turnout this morning, or this evening, or this afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. And what that looked like was oftentimes making strides on greening buildings and facilities. So for some faith institutions, this could have looked like adding solar panels to your roofs, or engaging in regenerative agriculture, taking action to reduce the direct contributions to the greenhouse gas emissions driving the climate crisis. But we also saw that faith institutions were overlooking a major contributor to the climate crisis, and that's the emissions that are being generated by these institutions' deposits and investments. The technical term for that is financed emissions, essentially the emissions that our faith institutions are responsible for by investing our dollars, our yen, our francs into fossil fuel companies and depositing our money, as you've heard, in banks that are funding fossil fuel companies. So what we realized what was needed to be done was to make that invisible visible. And so we put out a report in December And what that report set out to do was to analyze the amount of money that 50 major Jewish institutions have invested in coal, oil, and gas. We actually used the methodology that you heard about in the Carbon Bankroll report. And what we discovered was that these nearly 50 Jewish institutions had roughly $3.3 billion invested in fossil fuels. And what we could do is turn that into an amount of greenhouse gas emissions. You can see that in the graphic that I'm sharing on my screen. So $3.3 billion US dollars is the equivalent of 2.6 gigatons of carbon dioxide. But in order to make that truly tangible, we then used a tool from the US Environmental Protection Agency to put that into the equivalent of direct emissions. So what would it look like to have over 560,000 gas-powered cars on the road for 1 year, or to run 6.5 gas-fired power plants for a year as well. And again, our goal here was to really make that invisible, the financed emissions, visible and tangible, and to use that to direct action. So I will also share, we created a roadmap to action. It's 6 steps that faith institutions can use. As you can see, we've incorporated some Hebrew, some Jewish learning in the different steps of the process. But the goal is to move from that awareness of the role of finance to action. And for each of those steps of the roadmap, we have accompanying resources that are available on our site. So what we really felt was needed was education and engagement like we're doing today, but then a clear path on how to move into action. So I just shared a link in the chat that is how to access the roadmap and resources that I shared.
Thank you so much, Dahlia, for these insights. There are some questions in the chat. We will take them up later. Cher Père Matthieu, Father Matthieu, you used to work in the finance sector and you became a priest. You founded Théostream, the so-called Netflix of faith, and you have over 1.2 million followers on social media, many young people among them. Please tell us, Père Matthieu, why is climate responsible finance a moral imperative?
Eh bien, je ne sais pas si ça relève vraiment d'un impératif moral.
Well, I don't know really if it is a moral imperative. What I was told when I became a priest is that moral theology is finding ways to access what is promised to us by God, heaven, paradise. So if we are at peace with ourselves, if we think that happiness is today and not the future, is not tomorrow, if for us it's not obvious that my happiness depends on the happiness of the other, and that I will be more happy if the others are also happy and not unhappy. If you do not understand that, it's not a moral obligation for you. It's not a moral imperative. But if you recognize that your happiness will be fuller if others all over the world are at peace, are happy, then I think we will be able to act. And if we think that the small book that has been a bestseller for 2000 years has the best instructions to have a happy life, if we think that from the first part of the book Genesis, God instructs us to take care of the planet, of the earth, of everything that has been provided to us, if we think that you've done it to the least of us, as Saint Matthew said, he's among the least among us, and we'll find him there, then I think we'll be able to make progress. And this is how the church for 2000 years has been able to propagate the word of God, of the Lord, by creating schools, hospitals, by developing agriculture, by making sure that workers realize they have rights. This was the strength of the church. The church wanted to bring the peace of God now and for the future generation, obviously taking into account the different situations and problems facing the world. And today, to be honest, I'm wondering whether we are up to the challenge. I'm wondering about that because let me admit, dear friends, that I was surprised to be invited by Frederic at first. But actually, through research, through reading the different documents I was able to read, I have been converted and I have taken an appointment with a cooperative bank to change, because that's crazy, isn't it? Let's have a look at it. We try to be a good Christian, to follow the instructions of Jesus, to love our neighbor, to take good care of our neighbor, to be at peace. And we try to do that in every part of our life, with our family, at work, in associations and NGOs. We try to be good Christian. But one day we realize that at night, when we fall asleep, there is an external reality that is manipulating us without us wishing it to do the opposite. For example, things that would promote slavery, that would feed into wars, things that could destroy our planet, our diversity. If we were aware of this, wouldn't we change? Wouldn't we strive to make sure that everything changes? This is a small analogy that came to my mind in order to explain how crazy things that are done with our money are. I did not know that, but more than 90% of the money that are deposited in banks are used in products against biodiversity, petrochemical industry, weapon industry, an industry promoting some kind of modern slavery as well, pornography industry, tobacco industry. That's just mad, isn't it? We don't know that, but I was reading in the report of the Laudato Si Movement that 84% of the money deposited in banks are not supporting our very future, are not taking care of our very future, of the resilience. I was flabbergasted. I was puzzled. I tried to use artificial intelligence and ask questions to ChatGPT. It was in 2021, the whole knowledge built up. I asked him, what is the whole, the money of the churches in the world? And ChatGPT told me that there are 100 billion for churches in funds. But actually, there are 4.4 billion Christians all over the world. So it's not that. It's more than that. In fact, we have $2,200 dollars per Christian multiplied by the number of Christians. It is $5 trillion. That means $5 trillion that are in banks that are not especially used for the right projects for the future. So when you understand this, when you realize this reality, of course, this is not an accurate number. We should have studies about that to refine it. We realize that it equals to the industry of weapons, the industry of tobacco, and the industry of oil multiplied by 3. This amount represents this. This would be the second investment fund in the world after BlackRock. This is completely crazy. So all of that is done behind our back. And we do not realize that everything we have saved through our work, through our Christian values, in our commitments, these are the fruits of our work, and it is invested in this. And the impact of this is as big as the biggest investment fund. The impact is as big as the impact of the 3 aforementioned industries. That's crazy. I'm 38 years old. We are told we are the Y generation. This is why I decided to leave fortune management to become a priest. I wanted to have a life full of meaning. I wanted to have meaning in my life. In our generation, we need to be consistent. Maybe previous generations were consistent, but it's not the same situation we are in now. Today, I think we need to show consistency, and to be consistent, we need to act upon our money. Even though we are not healthy, 3,000 euros in a bank equals a New York, Los Angeles flight. That is incredible in terms of emissions. So we have money, but this money, we are not aware that it can be used to things that are worst that we could imagine. So it's fine to be aware of that. Then, of course, people want to have money. And banks will have to provide financial services that may be less profitable than the current ones. We need to focus on another profitability, a social and ecological profitability, future-oriented profitability. It is also about a spiritual profitability. If we think that everything around us is not random, that it is God-driven, if we think about that, I think, yes, I do believe that we're able to bet on something that is not profitable right now, that may be more profitable in the future, in the long run. So maybe, in a nutshell, to be at peace with ourselves. When I was working in the banking industry, it was not complicated to make money, but to be at peace with your mind when you go to sleep at night, that's different. When you want to be sure that everything you are doing has an impact for the future generation, has a meaning for them, that's much more difficult. That's much more difficult. So we need to understand what wrong uses can be made with our money. Our money is also a part of ourselves because we have worked to get it. So let's try to wish more to be at peace with ourselves, to have the means to preserve our common good, to have a future that is tinged with God-driven spirit. What we can do now is small maybe, but it will provide us peace of mind, and that's already important. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup for that, Matthieu. And that is, I was so intrigued, like I'm listening to what you're explaining, and also you having access to a lot of young people. You have more than 1 million followers on social media. I really hope that the young people that actually follow you will also get to learn about what you've actually shared with us. And also everyone that's on the call, I really hope that what we've gotten from this call, what we keep on getting from this webinar, will go online, we'll go on our social media platforms and just share the information that we've actually gotten, just in case there are people that couldn't make it today. I think would be really, really good to just, share this very, very important information that we are getting from the different speakers. And we'll actually get to continue with our discussion. And I'm sure by now, some of you are actually facing internal obstacles in actually ensuring climate responsible banking. We'll have a conversation or have a talk, or I'll bring in Helena to just have that information, or just give us more information. So Helena, you represent Oikocredit, and which is actually an organization founded at the WCC General Assembly over 45 years ago, and it's an ecumenical organization working on impact investment. In Germany, you have decades of experience training on the importance of bank choices. How can training help faith actors overcome this obstacle?
Thank you very much, Jessica, for the warm welcome, and it's a pleasure to be here. As you already said, I'm working for Oikocredit, which is an international ecumenical cooperative for social impact investment, and I'm working for a local support association. Oikocredit, as you mentioned, is rooted in an ecumenical movement, and during the WCC General Assembly in 1968 in Uppsala, Sweden, especially young people raised their voices. They urged to reconsider how the money, especially of church organization, is invested. These people didn't want that their money is supporting unjust systems like the apartheid in South Africa or the Vietnam War anymore. Thus, they argued to form an alternative. And finally, a few years on in 1975, Oikocredit was established. Today, Oikocredit is well known as a social impact investor, especially in the areas of sustainable agriculture, financial inclusion, and renewable energies. Here you may see one of the projects supported in microfinance and sustainable agriculture in Indonesia. It's Acem and her husband, Mami. But beside the opportunity of impact investment, the local support associations of Oikocredit are actively engaged in raising awareness, as you mentioned, Jessica, especially on sustainability, global justice, and how finance is related to these topics. Today, I want to share some of the insights of our activities of transformative learning, and especially what kind of workshops we do with young people and also grown-ups. So on the second picture, you can see one of the interactive modules we have on the finance system. We do offer different activities when it comes to global learning for transformation. For example, we have an online exit games, thematic walking tours, workshops, and online lab games, and different kind of presentations. We always try to get engaged with the people so that they come from learning also to action. I will present some of the insight of our materials. So it will be about how to overcome the obstacles when we face managing financial relationships. And I will end with some very concrete calls also for you. I love working with maps, and here you can see 4 maps to raise awareness on the unequal global distribution. So the first map shows how the land is actually distributed in relation to the actual land area. But how does it look like when it comes to the relation of the population, the total GDP or CO2 emissions? These maps lead people to change perspectives. Often I ask people themselves before showing them the maps, how could it actually look like, and let them guess. And yes, they often are surprised, like I see some of you now being quite surprised how it looks like. Where are most people living? Where are most financial resources? Who produces most CO2 emissions? Who is responsible, and how are the power relations working? For answering these questions, these maps may help. Then from the global level, coming more to a local and individual level. In case you have bank accounts, have you ever considered what your bank does with your money? And if this fits actually to the impact you would like your money to make? This graphic is inspired by 2 wonderful NGOs called Urgewalt and Facing Finance. On the left side, you see an investor, maybe it's yourself, someone who aims to save money, to bring the savings to the bank and then to receive some interests. But what some people do not consider, banks do work with our money and thus reinvest our money to gain interest themselves. But now the big question is, what are they investing in? We already heard some of the companies and activities banks invest in. Often they are very controversial, harmful to the environment and the workers, like you can see in the yellow circle. But then it's also your decision as an investor to decide which bank to choose. And yes, indeed, there are also banks who are eco-friendly, sustainable, or invest in social companies. It's your decision. The NGO Facing Finance, which works globally, releases a guide every year on an overview on how sustainable banks actually are, or where do they invest in. Here you see a screenshot from the German market, and most banks are listed here. It's about how sustainable do they invest. Besides choosing a bank and reconsider where the bank invests, and for sure there are also other ways of having a meaningful way of investment. For example, investing in renewable energies, join a cooperative, looking for the rating of the assets and ETFs, caring for sustainability, pay attention to the ESG scores and other seals for financial products. So this is what we kind of raise awareness for and ask our participants to pay attention to. So what concretely can you do? If you have a bank, check your bank. What is your bank investing in? In case you consider to invest, what impact shall your money have? Inform yourself to ensure that you also achieve this impact. And thirdly, talk about the power and impact one has with the money. Encourage other people to talk about fair finance and to raise awareness in their communities. And in case you need any further material, I'm happy to share our material or answer any kind of question, just to give you a glimpse of the activities we do.
Thank you, Helena, and thank you so much for the work that you're doing, and also just training and making sure that people are making the right choices when it comes to their banking. Really appreciate. Thank you so much. And also, I'm sure by now some of you are witnessing external obstacles that are actually linked to banks' way of working, and one of these is actually fiduciary duty. Nikki is an expert on climate law and policy and the director of the Climate and Energy Program at the Center for International Environmental Law. Nikki, you actually work on climate-related finance risk. What is fiduciary duty and how can participants overcome this obstacle?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining from. I hope you can see my screen is that sharing properly on the slide there? Thanks so much. First, just a huge thanks to the organizers for bringing together this important conversation. It really has never been clearer how much our current actions affect the rights of children today and really for decades to come, and how critical it is that we stop the money pipeline, bankrolling climate destruction, and accelerate the transition to a fossil-free, just and equitable future. And that's why my organization, CIEL, which works at the intersection of human rights and the environment, addressing climate change, knows we can't fight climate change and its drivers without shifting finance. But to come to your question, fiduciary duty is not actually an obstacle to climate responsible finance. And in a moment, I'll explain what we mean by that, fiduciary duty. But especially in these politicized times, we've been hearing that fiduciary duty is often used as an excuse for inaction. But really properly interpreted, it's actually a reason to align financial flows with what science shows is necessary to avoid catastrophic climate change and ensure a safe climate future, which is critical to children's rights and indeed to the human rights of all of us. But first, let me take a step back and explain what is fiduciary duty as it relates to finance and responsible finance. So fiduciary duty really just refers to the obligation of someone who holds another person's money in trust, such as an investment or pension fund manager, to act prudently in good faith and solely in the best interest of that person. It also applies to corporate directors and officers, such as those who run banks, who must make financial decisions in the interest of their shareholders. But the argument that fiduciary duty is an obstacle to climate responsible banking and investment is based on a misinterpretation of what the duty requires and permits in the midst of a climate emergency. Paying attention to climate risk is consistent, indeed compelled by with the financial aims of fiduciary and not at odds with them. And that's because climate change poses very real material risks to material financial risks, particularly to fossil fuel investments. Those investments are not just exposed to physical impacts from climate change, like extreme weather events and sea level rise, warming, and changes in water availability, which affect infrastructure and operations. They're also uniquely exposed to climate-related transition risks. That means the policies and consumer behaviors that are changing in the face of climate change, and increasingly to litigation risk as the number of lawsuits against big polluters multiply. And these risks have financial consequences, making investment in these sectors a bad idea presently and in the future. Failure to consider these climate risks and adjust investment accordingly can result in significant losses, especially given the competitiveness of renewables, which are the cheapest power option in the majority of the world today, and the inevitable decline of the fossil fuel industry. And I wanted to pull up this slide. I've just got these two slides to show that in the last decade, fossil-free investments have, which is the blue line here, have outperformed on average the S&P 500, the standard top firms, the white line, and particularly the energy sector, which is the gold line. This is just showing that the financial case for divestment from fossil fuels is strong and consistent with fiduciary duties. It's even stronger for long-term investors like pension funds that have an obligation to consider future beneficiaries' interests, including today's children, tomorrow's adults, since climate impacts will not only intensify in the future and fossil fuel assets will eventually be stranded. It's not a matter of if they will, it's really a matter of when. The timing is uncertain, but the direction of travel is clear. Bankrolling fossil fuels and other climate destructive activity contributes to systemic risks across the economy and to climate impacts that affect people's ability to enjoy financial benefits that they may gain. If the future isn't livable, financial returns have little value. And that's where you come in and where I'll wrap up. You can affect whether banks take these risks into account and actually help make the case that doing so, far from being in tension with their fiduciary duties, is consistent with their obligations. As others have said, where the money flows, emissions follow. And without your money, banks cannot lend and invest, including in new carbon bombs around the world. You have that power. And if you make clear that you don't want your money being used to support climate destructive activities, and you move your money to other banks or credibly threaten to do so, you not only create reputational risk for those banks, you actually influence the financial risk they face if they remain invested in those activities, and therefore the risks that they as fiduciaries need to consider when making investment decisions. If continuing to finance fossil fuels means they might lose the cash they invest with, well, that's a financial risk they can't prudently ignore. In other words, individuals, companies, organizations like many of you and the groups you belong to have the power to accelerate the transition and influence the transition risks that fiduciaries must consider by signaling that you'll move your money if they don't stop funding climate destructive activities. And as long as the legal frameworks don't expressly prohibit investments in fossil fuels or other climate destructive sectors, and increasingly they're leaning that way, pressure from bank clients is crucial to stop financing them. Your actions are critical to getting banks and other financial institutions to disclose what they're funding and the financed emissions that result from that, so that you can decide where and how your money should be used and with what impacts for present and future generations. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Nikki. This was very insightful. And we now have the time for questions and answers. Better, let's say, the clarifications which you as participants may want to get from our speakers. I use this occasion to also share that Kjell Kühne, the founder of Lingo, Leave It in the Ground, is with us now. So depending on the questions, he may also be one of the experts answering, but he can also speak a little bit later in the plenary session. Iyad, would you like to go ahead and share the first question? Dr. Iyad Abu Mogli, the founder of Earth UNEP. Go ahead.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I will help with the questions. There are several questions. Some of them are tough and would require another session and workshop. But some can be addressed now and probably later during the plenary session, we can take more of those. So one question from Brad saying, what evidence can you share that demonstrates divestment, changing banks and such that lowers fossil fuel support? So can we demonstrate any evidence that if we do so, banks will lower their investments? So to the speakers, anyone can answer this.
I would suggest either Nikki or Vanessa or Kjell. Would one of you like to answer? Repeat the question, maybe. yet. So
So indicators, it's about indicators. If we do what we are calling for today, not to invest in fossil fuel, how does that, what is the indicator that these banks will lower their investment? Well, I mean, simply from my perspective, there are global monitoring systems. This is how we know how much money is being invested in fossil fuel to start with. And there are rankings by international organizations. Certainly, UNEP does have a system through its UNEP Finance Initiative to follow up on the investments of banks. So that ranking, of course, changes when banks divest or reinvest in fossil fuel. So this is a simple answer from my part. Another question from Barbara. She says, in addition to divesting from fossil fuel, can we also advocate for divesting from institutions that form or support industrial animal agriculture, as many religions actually call for changing the diet system into less meat? So is that one of the divestment calls?
I don't know. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Frederick.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just thanks. Yeah, I certainly think there is a large and growing movement pushing back against agro industry, especially because it's deeply tethered to fossil fuels. That fossil fuels are the basis for agrochemicals and the pesticides that are used to build out agro-industrial development, and that is not only destructive through land use change, but through pollution and contamination. And so there is indeed a big movement, I think, also to call for consideration of those environmental impacts in investment decisions, and to shift money from pension funds and investment funds out of these problematic sectors that are driving climate change, as well as other converging crises around plastics pollution, toxics pollution, and biodiversity loss. And so I think it's a really important area to highlight. And just to point out that we do know that the divestment movement across both banks, but also large investment funds and asset managers has picked up tremendous steam in recent years. And we've seen, literally trillions of dollars in assets shift into make commitments to divest from and to phase out support for the production of fossil fuels, to phase out support and investment in those sectors. And there are a growing number of activities and businesses that can be invested in the renewable industry and alternative innovative approaches to agroecology and to local decentralized solutions are mounting and are available and increasingly competitive. So I just, as an encouragement and a plug, that this does work. We do have power both individually and institutionally to influence change, and the growing number of indices and measures that track and compare banking institutions and their climate footprints is adding to this pressure.
I'll just jump in there. Thank you, Nikki. I think that was really well responded to, and simply to say that a lot of this does start with a call on financial institutions to measure and report more transparently where their money and investments and loans are actually going. We actually know very little about what financial institutions do with their money. The data that I cited in our report comes from scraping and going through public reports and talking to bank officials. Much of this data is still not publicly available, and we have to introduce proxies to assess or estimate what the actual activities of banks are. And calling on them for what we can measure, we can manage, as we like to say. So a first step is to call on all financial institutions to simply disclose where their money goes. It's true that the emphasis on fossil fuels is overly simplistic. There are many carbon intensive or immoral areas where banks and financial institutions put their money. Fossil fuels are the most intensive and impactful sector on climate change for the moment, but that does not mean that we cannot get significant gains from reducing investments in other areas on a number of fronts. So measuring and disclosing all of our financial activities is a really important form for transparency and accountability.
Many thanks, Vanessa. We now have also an answer from Joseph Dalouin, who is responsible at Laudato Si Movement for the divestment campaign. Over to you, Joseph.
Yes, thank you, Frédéric. I just wanted to back what's already been said on the impact of divestment on the fossil fuel industry and the way the economy goes. So there's concrete impacts on the values of the shares and so the economic aspect of divestment is important, but I think it's also really important to stress that faith leaders, so we work within the Catholic community, but I think it's relevant for other faiths, that having faith leaders or people of faith and that are renowned for their wisdom to speak out through the investment policies of the institutions they are leading is really impactful. So we talk about prophetic investments. This is also a matter of how we spoke. So what is the future we believe in and how we act consistently with our representation of the future. And so faith institutions are also offering a way for the faithful in their daily lives. This is also something very, very important, to make investment decisions public and use them as a prophetic stance.
Many thanks, Joseph. And there are many other questions in the Q&A section. All of these will be answered after the event separately because of time reasons. As my dear participants, we have, before we move to our plenary session, a very, very important message from 13-year-old Ellyanne Wanjiku from Kenya, who contacted me to ask if we could make space on our event for her to share the outcomes of the African Children's Summit, which took place very recently. Ellyanne, I know you're getting hungry. You had to leave school early. I'm so sorry about that. And there's so many things to be shared about you because you've already won so many awards and you are the youngest climate ambassador of Africa. Perhaps the best is that you introduce yourself, right? Over to you.
Okay, hi everyone, hola, bonjour, jambo, hello. So my name is Ellyanne Wanjiku Chlystun. I'm 13 years old. I'm Africa's youngest climate finance and biodiversity champion. I was saying that when I was 4 years old in kindergarten, we were doing a project on heroes, and these heroes included Martin Luther King, Jomo Kenyatta, Uhuru Kenyatta, Wangari Maathai, and many other heroes. So I really fell in love with what Wangari Maathai was doing. So I started planting trees. I planted 10 trees, 1 tree in my garden, 10 trees in Kura Forest, which is the forest in Kenya. And then I continued, and so far now I've planted 1.3 million trees, and I'm happy to plant 1 trillion more. So yeah, that's basically a brief introduction about me. I used to do a lot about planting trees and climate change, but these days I focus mainly on climate finance and biodiversity. So I'm going to share my screen. So yeah. Can everyone see my screen or? Fine.
Starting to share. Walter, can you confirm if it's well set up or it says, yeah, no, I think it's okay, right? I can see it. Go ahead.
Okay. So the children are not afraid to follow the money. Let me start with a quote. It is now time for financial service providers to accelerate the shift to renewables. They have the power and the responsibility. The scientific and moral imperative is clear. There must be no new investment in fossil fuel expansion, including production, infrastructure, and exploration. This quote was said by Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General. So, after years of planting trees and children picketing all over the world with little change, I decided to pivot to climate finance. Us children now need to influence sources of money, policymakers, lawmakers for a sustainable transformation. We have nothing against businesses. After all, our parents work there. We're just asking for sustainable investments by banks and you. Okay. During the Africa Children Summit, the kids were very clear that they want change for their future survival to be guaranteed. We therefore decided to hold the first ever child-led Global Children Climate Summit from the 31st of August to the 1st of September. The Children's Outcome Statement and Declaration will feed into the Africa Climate Summit, which is on the 4th to the 6th of September, then feed into COP28. I am working with a child-led committee from different countries. Rockefeller Foundation advised that we also target showcasing a pipeline of green investments. Imagine if a green factory or renewable power generation starts somewhere in the village. Automatically, you will get schools, energy, and employment for parents. This will transform children's lives and other lives sustainably. Children's life will be mainly impacted if there's a green factory or renewable power generation in a rural area or in a village, because parents who live in villages and rural areas don't have enough money to pay their children's school fees and to pay for their children's well-being and to pay for the children's education. So if you have green factories or renewable power generations, then this will improve everyone's lives. Yeah. So what children need you guys to do? Number one, we need you to pray relentlessly. Number two, we need you to walk to your bank and ask the bank to show you where they invest. Number three, check that your bank is not investing in carbon bombs. Number four, write an email to your pension fund and find out what they're investing in. Number five, diversify your portfolio to green investments like solar or geothermal energy. Number six, organize community awareness and sessions in churches and weddings about green investments. Number seven, when you hear a debate about law changes, don't just sit there, read, understand, and participate. I want to say thank you to all the people who have spoken before me. I really appreciate what you've said, and I've really digested all the information that you gave me out. Thank you for listening to my speech. Have an amazing day or evening or afternoon, and God bless you all. Bye. Adios.
Thank you so much, Ellyanne, and I use the occasion to share that your book about faith from a teenager perspective is ready soon and will also be really interesting for us to read. Before we go to the plenary, I would now like to invite Kjell Kühne, founder of Lingo, Leave It in the Ground, and the author of the Carbon Bomb Maps, to please share a short intervention on your findings.
Thank you very much, Frédéric, and all the organizers for inviting me to join here. And I apologize for joining a bit late. It's early morning here in Mexico, and we don't use summertime anymore, throwing me off the long planned time to join you here. We are in the midst of the climate emergency. We are in a very specific historic moment where we need to leave behind the bad habit of burning fossil fuels and ending the fossil fuel age. And in that context, we asked a very simple, basic question: what are the biggest fossil fuel projects in the world? And surprisingly, that had not been answered, and it took some effort and research to answer those questions. And we defined these projects as fossil fuel extraction projects, coal mines or oil and gas fields that have the potential to result in 1 gigaton of CO2 over their lifetimes. So that means 1 billion tons of CO2. That's, double the emissions of Australia or more than Germany in a whole year in one fossil fuel project. We found over 400 such projects around the world. Half of them are coal mines, half of them are oil and gas projects. And one very interesting thing that we found was that 40% of these projects had not even started yet. So that means in the midst of the climate emergency, companies and governments are preparing to set up hundreds of fossil fuel projects of that size. And it's really a call to action for anybody who cares about humankind, who cares about a stable climate on our home planet, to stop that from happening. So the way we think about it is that we need to defuse carbon bombs. And the first step is to identify them where they are. The second step is to understand them better. And the third one, to go to the weak spots and defuse them. In terms of understanding, we have published the list, and you can find it on the Lingo website, and we'll be happy to share of these 400 projects. And I would like to mention that there are 3 clusters of carbon bombs, which I consider as more or less unattended by the climate movement. And that is in China, in the Middle East, and in Russia, where it's very difficult to work. Civil society has very limited space to, express their ideas and challenge government policies. And that means that many of these projects are not contested. And I think that is an important challenge to keep in mind. Now, when we look at these carbon bombs, they are huge projects. Their finance is in the billions, and they involve many actors, usually also a number of international actors. And that creates opportunity for intervention. And we have done this exercise with the help of Urgewald, which was also mentioned, who keep the coal exit list and the oil and gas exit list. And we showed international investors who are lending money to Russian carbon bombs, to the companies that are extracting fossil fuels or preparing to extract fossil fuels from the over 40 carbon bombs in Russia. And there were over 400 international institutions. And Russia is at war, and people do not support Putin's aggression in Ukraine. And yet over 400 Western financial institutions have money invested in the fossil fuel companies, filling the war chest. So that is the kind of possibility when you look at the carbon bombs, to point the finger at the actors who are doing this and stopping them from supporting. And just to end on a positive note, these projects are huge. They move very slowly. It takes several years to prepare and several decades to operate them. And it takes often more than a decade to turn a profit. That means for all of these new carbon bombs, the investors supporting them are placing a long-term bet on continuing this suicidal fossil fuel status quo, where we burn ourselves, into runaway climate change. And I think that us as a climate movement, us as humans who are, thoughtful beings, we will not allow this to continue for much longer. So this is a very risky bet by investors. There is a huge downside risk that something will change, society will react. And I think that that is the case against investing in carbon bombs. So thanks for inviting me to share here, and I look forward to seeing how to operationalize and all of us become part of defusing these big carbon bombs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kjell, for shedding light on this reality and for your amazing research, which I encourage everyone to look at in great detail. So now it is the moment where you all as participants are warmly invited to engage around the following 2 questions, which Jessica mentioned earlier. What actions will you undertake as a result of this webinar? And what support do you need to make these actions sustainable? You may want to raise your hand to share. Or for those who are more introvert, you are most welcome to share on the chat. And I hope that I can see who is raising hands. Walter, you said that this would automatically bring the person into the front, right? So that I would see. And while you may be thinking about sharing what you will do as a result of this webinar or what support you need. Luana De Felice, I see you're raising your hand. I welcome you to speak to the plenary. But I cannot hear you very well. Walter, can everyone else hear Luana?
No, it's really low. The microphone is not working.
I think Luana is saying that she's going to do something about it. In the meantime, Sophie Cohen from Switch It Green. And we'll go back to you, Luana, just after.
Hi there. Hello, everyone. What an amazing webinar. Such brilliant ideas from across the board, and I feel very inspired. As you may have noticed in the chat, I've put a few details about the campaign that I'm running at the moment, which I really encourage many people to get involved in. We're currently in the UK only, but we're going to be moving to the US and Europe ASAP. So if you're in the US and Europe and you want to get in touch to see how you could get involved, then I really welcome that. But basically what we're doing, the conversation around switching and lobbying banks has been very present today. And we've built a platform that makes that really, really easy. So we have the data on all UK banks currently and their investments in fossil fuels. And on the platform, you can find out what your bank is funding, choose a green bank, and then switch to that bank with support from us. And the important thing here is doing it alongside thousands of others. So it's really counted. Otherwise, you just do it. And I think, as Federico, someone said earlier, they just don't know you're leaving them. So, you know, it won't make a big change. So our goal with the platform is to ensure that that's really easy for people to do. So we're starting with current accounts tomorrow. And then over the next few months, we're going to be looking at business banking and pensions. And I'm sure many people on this call have either businesses they know of or pensions that they have. Another key area to divest your money from. So if you're interested in any of those areas, please do get in touch. And I'll put the link in the chat. Our goal is to move 7 billion out of potential fossil fuel investments in the next year. And we can only do that if we do it together. So thank you so much. And yeah.
Yes, Sophie, this is really great what Switch It Green provides. And it's an excellent accompaniment for those who are really wondering how to do it. I hope and wish you that you will be able to spread to many other countries very quickly. Over to you, Luana De Felice. Now you're just muted, that's the only thing. If you unmute yourself, it should work. Just click on the icon. In the meantime, if it doesn't work, Susan Perz, I can see your hand up as well.
Yes, hi. This is a wonderful, wonderful webinar, and it's so exciting to hear from people all over the world and what everyone's doing. I am actually in the process of switching my bank over. I've opened an account at a credit union. So this is something I've been working on, and I traveled to Brazil last summer and created a short documentary, Saving Jaguars and Ourselves, about climate change and how it's impacting the Amazon rainforest, which has 80% of it has to be protected by 2025 or it may collapse. And if it collapses, that will release up to 200 billion tons of carbon over the next 30 to 50 years. So it's really at a very difficult place, and it's really important for us to address agribusinesses as well as fossil fuels. So I really applaud your work, and I've also started a newsletter that's free on climate actions, daily climate actions, which I put in the chat. And there's a take action section on my website too. So I really appreciate what you're doing, because I think divestment is the path forward.
Great, thank you so much, Susan, also for sharing that newsletter link on the chat. Shall we try again, Luana, and see if it works now?
Yes, I'm sorry for the technical difficulties. Yeah, I had a question about whether I'm motivated to want to share this with more people. I'm part of a creation care team at my church and also to share it with people there. But I'm wondering if there is some sort of a small brochure with the information, like as a handout. I not to be, I guess that could be environmentally unfriendly as well on some level, but on some scale to like have a contact or a discussion with the person, but then leave them with something, with some main websites or main sites that might be helpful or key points to help them perhaps follow through and us to follow through with them in the future. If something like that already exists, or I can possibly, create something myself, but I was wondering if something was out there.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
also for our investors or banks and such.
In fact, I
But
think
especially
that the background read prepared with Jody Salter could be turned into such a leaflet. And in that background read, we've also made available overview on all the banks which we know are climate responsible, those who are really completely divesting from fossil fuel. And many other tips and resources are available in that background read. So Jody, maybe we can consider that later through the collaboration with JLI. I would now like to invite Chelsea McMillan from Green Faith. You are also organizing a big summit this week. Over to you.
Yes, thank you. It's so good to join all of you. I'm Reverend Chelsea McMillan. I am the Climate Finance Campaign Organizer at Green Faith, which is an international interfaith grassroots climate justice movement. And we are talking about all of these things. I already see some of our folks on this webinar, and it's great to see so many partners. And yeah, hello again, Susan. And yes, this week we are having a climate finance summit. So would love to have you all join so we can keep talking about and planning and actually taking action together. So I'm going to drop a few links in the chat. One is the registration link to this climate finance summit. One of the ways that we're taking action is to sign a letter to be delivered to asset managers to adhere to moral standards as they're making investments. And we have a letter for individuals to sign as well as faith institutions. So if you can sign for faith institution, we'd really love to have you sign that letter. But would love to see all of you. We're in the midst of moving money from both banks and asset managers, both as individuals of faith, but also as institutions of faith. So
thank you, Reverend Chelsea. And I watched the recording of your first session yesterday, which I thought was fantastic. Also, you have a song which was shared, a song to mobilize everyone around this powerful action. I think if you have the link to that, you could also put it into the chat box.
Yep, I'll share that. Thank you.
Dahlia Rockowitz, over to you.
Thank you. I, first of all, wanted to flag that in the Q&A box, Nikki and I and some of the other speakers have been trying to address some of the questions directly. So wanted to direct eyes to that section. I also just wanted to respond to several questions around reinvestment and banking alternatives and investment alternatives. And I really wanted to lift up part of what Vanessa shared, that our goal is for these financial institutions to be better and for them to enable us and other investors and bankers to have more options to invest in clean energy and climate solutions. The only way to go about doing that is to let the banks know that you're leaving, or that you are planning on leaving, or you're considering leaving because you want them to change, that they're not doing good enough. So it's critical to engage with those financial institutions before moving your money. And it's critical to keep engaging in all the places where you're a customer or client so that we can have more and better financial products to invest in these life-giving, life-sustaining technologies and make sure they're accessible to all. So really wanted to lift that up. There are lots of resources out there. I know that there's sample letters, there's how to have a meeting with your bank, how to write an op-ed, but that is a critical part of this work. If we move our money but fail to engage with these financial institutions, we're not going to have the impact that we need in the time that we have to turn the tide of the climate crisis.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. In fact, yes, there's another question just posed by Brad Stocker in the Q&A. Would you like to take the floor, Brad?
Oh, okay, thank you. I very much was impressed with Ellyanne's presentation, and partially, no, mostly because it comes from a young voice, and represents the people that are or the category of people that are most impacted and affected. And I wanted to invite her to come. You asked the question earlier, what would we do? And I would like to invite her to come speak to my organization, Quick Earth Care Witness, and also to see if I could somehow connect her with two other youth organizations that I know here in the United States. But and if her slides are available, because I couldn't get a picture of it real quick. Thank you so much. And I'm just super impressed with what she's done and what she said today.
Yes, and indeed, all the slides will be made available after this event. And yes, I also felt that, Ellyanne, you play an immense role because you have such an incredible capacity with 13 to share in a clear way information on such a complex issue. So thank you so much again, Ellyanne. Lena Eisner, would you like to take the floor?
Thank you.
Over to you, Lena.
Thank you very much. This has been a wonderful presentation. I appreciate hearing from everybody, and especially this wide breadth of people from around the world. I do not represent a faith organization. I represent an organization of elders that are coming together to address some of these problems. And we have our own fossil fuel finance work that we're doing, and we're targeting asset managers, especially Vanguard and other asset managers, because as older people, we have retirement funds. And I bring this up because my husband is a rabbi, and I've learned in my work that elders have a moral voice, just as people of faith have a moral voice. And many people do not, might not identify as a person of faith, but they might identify as an elder and recognize that they have a responsibility and a natural caring for future generations and our children. And so this has been really wonderful to listen to. I appreciate many of the resources, and I see some of my colleagues on here, and thank you very much. And I'll put my organization in the chat.
Yes, and thanks to all grandparents who are engaged in such actions. It is now time for us to move to the Way Forward session. And it is my great pleasure to introduce Kirsten Laufson-Muth, who is the CEO of our amazing partner, JLI. Over to you, Kirsten.
Yes, thank you so much, and I'm delighted to be here. It's been a great event. Just for those of you who don't know the JLI, we're a learning network of academics and practitioners that focus on the evidence of the role of religions in development. And some of the ways that we're contributing to this work is, and hope to take this work forward, is through our State of the Evidence, which is a summary overview of reliable evidence in our field. It came out last year, and one of the chapters addresses climate and environment, and the 2024 edition will delve more deeply into this topic. Also, in a paper recently published in Climate and Development, JLI analyzed how 50 different faith actors frame and define climate change. So this paper highlights the diverse ways faith actors from around the world engage with and respond to climate change, and shows how faith actors are able to situate climate change in moral and religious frameworks while remaining connected to its practical impact. So for us, the way forward will be helping to produce the report of this event, which you will all receive copies from. We hope to continue to engage with our other co-sponsors of this event, and to continue to develop the evidence of the work that all of you are doing in this area. So we appreciate very much the time that you've put into attending this event. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. And now over to Dr. Iyad Abou-Mogli from UNEP Faith for Earth.
Wow, this is fantastic. Thank you very much for everybody who participated in this discussion, for all the speakers, for all the inspirations that we have, and for all the good data that we learned about today. This is indeed science meeting religions, and religions meeting the needs of the people. Well, Faith for Earth is part of the United Nations Environment Program. As you know, UNEP is the highest authority on environmental governance, and the member states of UNEP decide on the future of the people in terms of environmental decisions and resolutions. So our aim in creating this Faith for Earth coalition is to bring the voices of religion, spiritual and moral responsibility into the policy discussions with the politicians and decision makers. So all of our activities and connections with our partners contribute to three important goals. The first one is to bring religions to policy. There's no more a space for sidelining religious actors from political discussions and policy decisions. And the second is exactly the issue that we are discussing today, which is financing sustainable development and financing the future generations and a future for the coming generations, a future that we leave without regrets and without mistakes and without feeling of guilt. We have an obligation to do so. So investment in sustainable environment and sustainable life is important, while we pressure financial institutions, but also we need to look internally to religious institutions who are the fourth largest economic power on earth, to invest internally and to direct their investments into positive and impact investment. And finally, the goal is to bridge the gap between religious teachings and scripts and what the science is saying. And this is exactly why we are here. UNEP is committed to continue this journey with all of our partners. We have UNEP established the UNEP Finance Initiative in 1992. Currently, we have more than 400 banks, members of this initiative. Those banks that feel the urgency of climate action and feel the moral responsibility, and they are working on applying the principles for financing or moral financing and moral investment and moral pension funds as well. So we have more than 400 banks that are members of the initiative or the coalition for principled financing and investment. So we are continuing this journey with commercial banks. We welcome other new banks, but also we welcome religious-based or religion-based banks as well. We know that there are a number of them that have not joined the initiative. Some have. For example, the Church of England is a pioneer and is a member of the UNEP Finance Initiative, and we invite others to join and practice what we are teaching and preaching. So we are continuing the journey. We are continuing the Faith for Earth Coalition engagement on climate action. We are facilitating a global movement towards COP28 in Dubai in November. So we already have dozens of faith organizations, members of the preparatory work that we are doing. We are going to have a high-level faith leaders summit, including the highest level religious leaders convening together unifying their voices and their call to action, but also establishing a long-lasting and sustainable mechanism to move them forward together, unified in their action for future generation and against climate change. So my profound appreciation to all our member organizations, our partner organizations, and profound gratitude to each and every one of you for joining us today. Thank you, and back to you, Frederica.
Thank you, Iyad, and let us all transform the carbon bombs which are mapped by Shell.
Alors, transformons-nous cette bombe de carbone en bombe d'espoir pour les enfants.
Use and share the resources provided in the background read. A huge thanks to Jody Salter from JLI for this amazing collaboration. I hope you will experience along this journey that responsible banking is a very effective remedy against eco-anxiety. Thanks again, and especially to Jessica Bvali from the United Church of Zambia for co-moderating today's event. Over to you, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Frederica, and thank you so much to all the speakers. Really appreciate just sharing the information that you actually had, the information that you had to all of us. Thank you so much. And to all the participants from wherever you joined us from, thank you so much. Asante sana, shukran, merci beaucoup, Dankeschön, gracias.